Thank you, Luc, for the introduction. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, okay. After the general overview of Victor about what the ESPON 2020 cooperation program can do for you, we were asked to show some examples of ESPON research that show what territorial researchers can do for understanding and utilizing offshore energy potential. My response to this request is coming from the ESPON Applied Research Project that started at the beginning of the program. It's the Potential European Territorial Futures Project. This project developed territorial foresight methods and approaches and applied that to three what-if questions. And one of these what-if questions is related to renewable energy. But first, what is actually territorial foresight? Territorial foresight is a framework to support stakeholders in a structured forward way of thinking concerning territorial development. Territorial foresight is a future-oriented approach characterized by critical thinking on long-term developments and the impacts of these developments on the territories. The benefits of territorial foresight are that it helps to understand what are possible territorial consequences of a larger trend and of larger development objectives. It helps to approach complexity and uncertainty by bringing together insights and knowledge of a wide range of different participants. And this is a way to approach complexities and uncertainties where no quantitative information about the future is available. It also helps to create a larger ownership. This can strengthen the ownership of the foresight topic and help to develop pointers for policy making. It also helps to inform decision making, which then leads to policy decisions that can avoid unwanted territorial implications and accelerate wanted implications. Next slide, please. The what-if question that was addressed by this project is, what could be the territorial consequences if Europe had a fully renewable energy system by 2030? The project identified three main components to help understand the territorial dimension of a fully renewable European energy system. And these three components are regional transport and mobility, for which it is expected that transport costs will increase steeply. The second one is a reduction in energy consumption, for which a drastic reduction in energy consumption for industrial processes, transport, buildings, and households will be needed. And the third one, which is relevant for this workshop, is the regional renewable energy generation, which is more land intense than fossil energy production. Next slide, please. The project developed this map illustrating the expected territorial impacts of a transition to 100% renewable energy in relation to regional renewable energy generation. And the main conclusions are that due to an increased importance of wind, solar, and hydroelectric power production, those regions with high potentials will benefit. Densely populated areas with a high renewable energy source potential will experience land use and environmental conflicts. Regions that have already considerable regional energy source capacities installed will find it easier to transition to a fully renewable energy system than regions that rely heavily on fossil or nuclear-based energy. And finally, regions with low economic performance will find it harder to mobilize the huge investments needed for energy system transformation. Next slide, please. To help practitioners to design their own successful territorial foresight process, this project developed a handbook in which they present the approach they developed and described a large number of methods to illustrate the richness of the approaches available. They recognize that the application of any handbook or guidelines depends on the tradition in which a practitioner works, and on the organizational context in which the work has to be carried out. Every practitioner will have preferred methodologies, and the choice of which to use depends on what is appropriate for the study being carried out. The handbook is structured along 3 parts. Part A presents a stepwise guide to territorial foresight processes, and this has also been tested by the ESPON project. Part B provides a more general guide to co-creative foresight-oriented policymaking, and Part C offers a wide contextual framework. These are the topics from this ESPON project, which are most relevant and useful to sustainable energy production in the Black Sea. And Michaela will now show some findings of other ESPON projects that are also very relevant to this workshop. Michaela?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Marjan. Okay, yeah, here we are. So I'm taking over from Marjan, and I will focus on the 2 projects that we've done so far within ESPON, really dedicated to the European seas and maritime spatial planning. And these are the ESPON project, which was also a big applied research project looking at the entire European territory, including all the European seas. And as you can see, this dates back actually to 2013. But nevertheless, I think, and we also saw then in a subsequent project, MSP-LSI, a lot of the evidence gathered there is actually still relevant, and a lot of the recommendations from back then can also still be useful nowadays. But anyhow, it was the first time that we as ESPON actually really stepped into the sea, and we mapped sea use patterns and analyzed for the first time also the relationship between terrestrial and maritime planning. And then a more recent project, which we completed in 2019, was then focused on some specific case study area throughout Europe, in the Baltic Sea, in the North Sea, and in the Mediterranean Sea. And that looked at developing really a general framework for looking at land-sea interactions within the context of developing maritime spatial planning. And the key takeaway from that project really is to follow a one space approach to spatial planning. So not really to distinguish between maritime planning on the one hand and land-based planning on the other hand, but really to consider both as integral parts of one planning exercise. And then also there is an ESPON policy brief that we compiled 2 years ago. No, I'm sorry, that's actually a mistake. That was last year, Maritime Spatial Planning and Land-Sea Interactions, that compiles some of the most important messages really from the MSP-LSI project. So as we were asked, as Marjan said, to showcase a bit what we can do at ESPON to help you understand and understand really the maritime spatial planning issue and land-sea interactions in general. I will focus on some of the key messages and some of the visualizations also that emerged from the 2 projects I was just talking about. And so the ESPON project developed for the first time a European maritime regions typology. And here the Black Sea region emerged as a regional hub, which means that it shows high maritime employment, it of significant economic importance. So the typology as such, maybe just to go back a step, is based on economic significance of both land and sea in that particular region, on flows taking place there, so flows of people, of goods, of information also, transport routes, cables and pipelines in the respective seas, and then also the environmental pressures that are experienced in a particular sea region. So what we can see here also for the Black Sea, which is considered as a regional hub, is that significant environmental pressures are also experienced there. And if you are interested in that project, there are actually 2 dedicated annexes to that project report, really just focusing on the Black Sea, on governance matters, but also on general characteristics of the Black Sea as a European maritime region. But what that project already did, as I said earlier, was looking really at the interface of land and sea to bring both together in, as I just said, this comprehensive one space planning approach. Because as we can nicely see from this map here, all parts of the European territory, so even for landlocked countries like Luxembourg, where Marjan, Victor and I are based in with the ESPON EGTC, all parts of the European territory are really connected to a European sea because of land-sea interactions. So just think, for instance, of in terms of pollution. So, you know, a lot of the pollution that flows into our rivers eventually actually then will flow into a European sea. Think also in terms of transportation, where approximately 80% of Europe's imports arrive by sea and are then transported onwards via a river to some of the most densely populated areas in Europe. So here you can very clearly see that there are interlinkages between land and sea that maybe we don't always necessarily think about in that sense. And that is why I think this map is really quite important, because it does make these connections very, very visible. And also for policymakers, makes it quite clear that these interrelations are really important to consider in terms of planning. Because also there can be potential conflicts of use of space, as Marjan also said. It can be in terms of land use, it can be in terms of sea use, where particularly now when you're considering in the Black Sea to further exploit or really go into exploiting offshore wind energy, there can be potential conflicts of interest in terms of tourism, of nature protection. So all of these issues clearly need to be taken into account. Now, looking more concretely into renewable energy, and particularly here then on offshore wind energy. So what this project MSP-LSI that I mentioned also did was mapping the blue energy typologies, which actually already the Forerunner project did, and then MSP-LSI just updated the relevant data and also the map going with it. And this is certainly important, as you also know, and as we've heard also in the introduction, given that different countries, Europe, around the world, we're trying to decarbonize energy supply because of climate change, because we need to change the way we live and how we work, but also to ensure greater stability in terms of energy supply. And this is why then blue energy sources play such an important role in the further decarbonization efforts. But when you think back to the map I just showed you concerning the interrelations between land and sea, this also makes it clear together with this map here that the delivery of blue energy really requires also very effective partnerships between different stakeholders, not only across different governance levels, but also private and public stakeholders, because very often it's private stakeholders that then engage in, setting up the offshore wind energy platforms and also maintaining and servicing them. So this is where strong partnership and consultation really plays a key role. And also what needs to be taken into account is that there are various spatial impacts of such developments that, again, as land-sea interactions do, they can extend a long way from where the production takes place. And that, again, just only serves to show how this comprehensive planning approach is really important. Now, what I'd like to show you here with this figure is a value chain approach that was developed by this project MSP-LSI for different maritime sectors to really try and visualize the different elements that do play a role in specific maritime sectors, how they depend on one another, how they also interact with elements of other value chains, and how they really also leave a particular spatial footprint on land, and how they can also then serve to assess the, as the project actually coined it, the stickability. So really the economic, but not only really the economic benefits of a specific maritime sector. So here we're looking then at offshore wind energy and the value chain there. And here there are different elements that play a role that certainly you're aware of. So that's the development part, where it's about, you know, planning the most appropriate location and foreseeing then the necessary planning for that. Then we're talking about manufacture and assembly, which is something that, so manufacturing can actually take place in locations that are quite far away from the location where eventually the wind farm, the offshore wind farm, can really be. So that is not even necessarily located close to the platform in the end, whereas assembly is mostly found either quite close to the coast, where also then the offshore wind energy platform will be then set up, or at least close to a port, so that these elements can be easily transported. Then the next element would be transport to ports, shipping to locations, so really taking out all the elements to a platform. We're looking at installation and commissioning, then operation and maintenance, and eventually after a couple of years, this can also be a matter of decommissioning then that is taking place. And again, for all these elements, maritime spatial planning has really an important role to play, be it in, as I said in the beginning, in the spatial allocation, in possibly redirecting certain maritime activities. So maybe shipping lanes need to be redirected because new offshore wind energy platforms might be set up. Maybe tourism is going to be affected and therefore needs to be replanted, or, you know, so it's different purposes really that need to be considered also to avoid conflict. And then finally, I would like to show you this map, also one of the products of the MSP-LSI project, focusing on one of the case study areas, which was the Pomeranian Bight. So that's part of the Baltic Sea, which is actually a cross-border sea area also between northeastern Germany and northwestern Poland. And here this shows us again also offshore wind energy. And as we can see, I hope you can see it. I know that the small inlay map on the bottom is quite small, but I think it nevertheless serves the purpose of showing that what I said earlier, that for instance, turbine production, that is something that mainly takes place in Denmark. So it's not even close to that particular case study region, but it's in Denmark, and other associated material is also produced throughout Northern Europe and then transported to the Pomeranian Bight. Then larger components and also the assembly, larger components that are produced, and then the assembly of these components, that's usually done quite close to the coast, or as I said earlier, also close to ports to save transport costs. And then there is also the supply of specialist materials or smaller components that are also needed for maintenance throughout the years. And these can come from companies that can be located really well away from that coastal area. So as you can see on that small inlay map in the bottom here, this is Germany that you can see. And here there are regions in southern and southwestern Germany that have actually the greatest economic benefit from offshore wind energy taking place in the Baltic Sea in northern Germany and northern Poland. So concerning economic stickability and the benefit of these coastal communities there, it is, when we're talking about offshore wind energy, actually rather limited, whereas regions that are really quite far away from this particular coastal region, they actually reap the greatest economic benefit, because they also provide materials and components not only to that coastal region, but also worldwide to other offshore wind energy manufacturers or producers. Then also, in terms of, as was said earlier, in terms of potential conflicts, it could be that coastal communities, while there might also be some job creation, there's some new job creation, they can also suffer from some potential conflicts. So very often in these regions, tourism also plays an important role, as is there also in this particular region. And there are also some reconciliation between these different uses needed, or still needs to take place, to make sure that tourism isn't affected too strongly by that. So that is our contribution from ESPON. You can find all these project reports and also the publication. I mentioned the policy brief on maritime spatial planning and land sea interaction on our website. They are freely available. And also, should you have any question maybe after this workshop today, please don't hesitate to contact us, either Marjan or myself. Thank you very much.